In this video, you'll learn how to build a file management application completely without code on Bubble. From managing folders to sharing files with different permissions, you're going to see step by step all of the core features you'll need to work with files in an application. And whether file management is all your app does or is maybe a single feature in a larger project, you need to know how to work with the database structure, the designs, and the workflow logic to properly put something like this together. So we're going to start with an overview of our demo application so you can see what to expect. So our design is broken down into three sections. At the top, we have our search. We can filter our folders and files by type here. We can reset the search, and we'll see as we navigate through the hierarchy of folders, we'll have a breadcrumb trail to help us navigate through our file manager overall. Let's say that I wanted to search for anything that has the word screenshot in it. Okay, so I have two files. We kind of entered a search result mode. Some of those things disappeared here to kind of help us focus on our search results. So I have two files with the word screenshot in it. And I can see beneath the name of the file, I can also get to the folder that that file lives within. So if I go to images, it's going to take me to the images folder, and now I'm at that level of my hierarchy. I'm going to reset here. Let's say I want to search for anything that has the word video. Okay, so now I have a matching folder as well as a matching file. Right, I can search through both of those kind of data categories. Let's do one more here. I'm going to type in sample. I get a little bit more variety here. I got one folder, three files, and within the files I have different file types. You can see PDF, then we have two videos. All right. If I wanted to filter specifically by, let's say, PDFs, then we're going to see that get narrowed down. Right, so I'm going to reset that. Okay, so the top of the screen is for that breadcrumb navigation as well as searching. Now, the second section are the folders. So right now we're looking at the home level of our file manager. This is the root of the hierarchy. It's the starting point. So I have three kind of most parent folders. I also have three files which are technically not within a folder. They're just at the home level. Okay, and as I navigate through the folders, let's say I open up the media folder here. Okay, the perspective is going to change. So now you can see from the breadcrumb, I'm within the media folder, which has three subfolders of its own. It also has two files of its own. I'm actually going to go back to home so you can see here within the details, we've labeled that as well. Three folders, two files, just to give the user a visual cue and hint as to what this folder contains. Okay, so I can continue navigating down to images. Right, so now I have three separate folders for images. I have one file there, and I can keep going as far as I want. And if I wanted to create another folder, let's go back to images, and let's create a new folder here. All right, so it's going to add another line, and I can add, let's say, a fourth folder for logos, something like that. Right, so it's going to sort itself alphabetically. You definitely have control over that. And if I go back to media, I can see that the images count right now has four subfolders. All right, so back to the home of our file manager. I want to go over some of these other functions we have here for folders. So the first thing we're seeing with the icons is the permission level for the folder. So a folder can either be restricted or it can be public. Those are two permissions that I made up. Okay, these are not built in any way into Bubble's native system. These are just rules that I created and that you can create and customize for yourself. So for this folder that I own, I'm currently logged in as Ross here. You can see that there's actually a border around the name. So that tells me that I can edit the name of the folder because I own it. I cannot edit any folders that I don't own here. Also, I can manage the folder. You see this menu, more menu icon here. I don't see that for folders that I do not own. So when I click on this here, I have access to a few more functions. So we're going to take a quick look at these. If I go to manage access, I can add specific people to the list. Let's say I also want to add Rachel to the access list. And all this means is that when these users log into the application, they will also see the folder in their list, right? It's restricted, but it's restricted to these listed people. And the owner is always going to be listed here. Again, all of these rules I made up. I put them together in a custom way because that's how I want my file manager to go. But you absolutely have control for having this work differently. Let's say I want to change this to a public access. Okay, we're going to see the icon change here when I click on save. right? So now anybody who is logging into the application will be able to see this folder. And you, again, also have control over, if you wanted to organize things by teams or accounts, companies, whatever it might be. Okay, let's look at the next function here. We can move folders. So let me add a new folder. Actually, let's go back to the media, back to images, and that logos folder. Let's say I want to move that out into just the media level rather than within the images. Okay, so I'm going to come over here and select move, and I have a little prompt at the top. I'm sort of in a move mode right now that says navigate to the new parent folder for logo. So I'm going to take myself back to media. Okay, let's say that this is where I want to move my logos folder. So I'm going to click on move to media, and we can see now it's moved there. I didn't copy it or anything. It's just been reorganized with different relationships behind the scenes so that now we can see logos within media rather than within images. And if I open up images again, we can see that logos is not there. All right, let's go back to our functions here. Okay, change owner. I'm going to change the owner of one of my other folders. Let's do the logos again. Just so that you can see, I want to make sure I have one Ross folder out there. So I'm going to change the owner of the logos folder, and I'm going to give this to Chandler. Okay, so I'm searching the users. I can confirm that this is the person I want. If I change my mind, I can discard, nothing happens. Okay, or I can come back into this and I can say, all right, I'm ready to change to Chandler. And we can see here the owner relationship has been updated. I can no longer edit this because Chandler is now the owner. Now I still have access to it because I did before, but now Chandler can decide to remove me from this folder if he wants. Okay, and then our final action here is to delete. So I'm going to, let's add another folder. I'm going to say test to delete. And just to show you here, when I click on delete folder, it will show me a confirmation pop-up. It'll show me the name of the folder. Are you sure you want to delete? It's going to take with it all inner subfolders, right? And any files that are attached to those folders. We haven't even touched files yet, but any files contained within the folder I'm deleting or any subfolders will all be gone. Again, this is how I want my deletion process to go. You can, of course, make yours different. You can make yours more comprehensive, or maybe the user chooses, yes, I want to delete everything within it, or no, I just want to delete the one folder and I want you to move everything else up the hierarchy, right? You can absolutely accomplish those things. So if I change my mind, I can just click on keep folder. It'll just hide the pop-up, nothing else happens, or I can click on delete and it will delete that folder. We see it disappears there. Okay, so those are our folder functions. Now let's go into file. File's very similar, right? We have our permission access, restricted versus public. I have the owner of the file. We also are able to extract details about the file so that we know the type of file. Let me actually go back to home here, right? Different types will get different icons. We have the size of the file, of course, the last modified, and very similar to the folders, I have all of the same functions here. They work the exact same way. All right. The only difference between the folder section and file section is that with the creation, we're going to have a drag and drop ability here where we can just pull from our file manager. You can see my window here and upload. Let's say I want to add this image of some pens to my drag and drop. You can also do multiples if you want. Hit on cancel there. Okay, so that's processed, and now we can see the file lives within the folder that I was in when I dragged it to here. If I, made a mistake and I want to move this new screenshot image, we can do the same thing. I'm going to move, and let's maybe move it to media and images and screenshots over here. So I'm going to click move to screenshots, and there we can see it would be this first one here with the timestamp. It's the later one. Right, so there it is. Now I can also confirm by just opening the file. So if I click on this here, it's going to open it up in a separate tab. What you experience when you open a file is just going to depend on the nature of that file. Browsers can handle images, PDFs, things like that, but many other file types like Word documents or spreadsheets will typically trigger an automatic download of the file to the device by the browser. So it's just going to depend on what happened, what type the file is for what happens with this button. right? So there's all of our functionality for our file manager. This is going to be a great baseline for you to get started with so you understand the data structures, all the different relationships that you need in order to have things appear in the right spot, make sure that everybody gets the right access, right? They only can see what they are allowed to see. And you can work with a variety of file types, extract these details so it's as valuable as possible for your users. Keep in mind that the plan your Bubble application is on is going to dictate your file storage capacity. This isn't based on the number of files you're uploading, but rather the size. So for example, if your app is on the free plan, you can upload 500 megabytes worth of files. If you move up to the first paid plan, that number goes up to 50 gigabytes, so a lot more room there. And then the higher in tiers you go, the more space you'll get as well. If you are on a paid plan, you also have the ability to add on more capacity by paying an extra $3 a month for every additional 100 gigabytes. And later on in this video, we'll go over some best practices so that you can see how to optimize your file storage so that you're only using what you need and you're not overpaying for that capacity. Okay, we're going to dive into this walkthrough by starting with the database architecture. This is the first place you want to go to no matter what type of app you're building, because how you organize your data will actually influence your designs and all of your workflow logic. Let's take a look. All right, so now we're inside the editor for this application. We're within the data tab and the data types subtab. There are 3 data types that we're working with to put all these features together. The first one is the user type. This is built into every single Bubble application. We just have a few fields here to help identify our users when we're marking them as owners or adding them to the access list. So we've got an image field here for the avatar, or the profile picture, first name, last name, and then full name. This way we have some options for displaying things and keeping things a little easier for us. Then we have 2 data types here, one for folder, one for file. Notice that you can add emojis here to the names. I find that to be very helpful because these names show up all over the place in your editor. So my folder data type is going to have several fields here. We have the access list, which is a list of users. Okay, so when you're creating your new field, just make sure that you check the box if you want the field to hold multiple values. So I just typed in access list here and I selected the user type so that I could have a relationship between the folder and one or more users, right? So that's how I created that field. I have a very similar structure here for a list of other folders. So we're using the same data type to create this sort of infinite nesting of folders. So a single folders can have children, right? A list of folders. A single folder can also have a parent. A folder doesn't have to have children. That means it would be at the end of the hierarchy. And a folder also doesn't have to have a parent. That would mean that it's at the top of the hierarchy here. And if we go into our app data for the folders data type, you can see these are all the folders we have in the entire system. If we kind of scan through the parent folder column here, you can see that only 3 of them do not have a parent. And that's going to line up with, over here back in the home view of our folders, these 3 starting folders here. Okay, now back over to the data types. A folder can also have a list of files, right? It can have both folders and files within it. So for example, if I go into the media folder, the media folder has both subfolders as well as files directly within it. Okay, so I have those 2 different lists there for organizing that however I'd like. Of course, I have a text field for the name of the folder that the user can customize. I have a single user relationship so that a single folder has only one owner. So we've already talked about the parent folder here. This is just a relationship to one single folder. This is the immediate parent. So a folder could be, several levels deep into the hierarchy, such as this images, and then we go to illustrations, right? We're several levels down, but each of these individual folders are only going to be tied to their most immediate parent. Once we have the parent, we have access to everything else, right? Because once we get to that parent, we can go to its parent and work our way back up the chain. I also have an option set field here. Okay, so this field is called permission. This is tied to one of my option sets, but we have 2 options for it, public and restricted. This way I can create kind of sweeping conditions and access rights to managing the folder based on just this one field alone. Doesn't matter who is in the access list, but the permission itself may dictate what those users see. So if we go over to the option sets here, I only have 2 option sets in this app right now. I have one for permission, like I said, those 2 choices. And then my second one is for type. And then this is specifically for assigning a type to a file and also for filtering our files when we're out here in the file manager. So again, if I choose PDFs, it's going to show me all of the PDFs in my entire manager here, regardless of what folder they're in. And so this option set is a great way for me to have consistency in the type options. Okay, back to our data type. Those are all of the fields for the folder data type. So let's now move into the file data type. So very similar structure to the folder. It's nice to have these separate, that way you don't cross wires. The entities, even though technically they're structured quite similarly to one another. So a file is going to have a list of users for the access list, a text field for the name, an owner field for the owner, right? This is a relationship to a user. Same permission option set that this can be tied to. A file is going to have one parent folder. And then we have some fields here that are unique to the file data type. We have the size in bytes. The smaller your kind of base unit is, the easier it will be for you to convert things. So as we have larger sizes, we can just calculate what that is. We can do some multiplication, some division to display things properly. So this is just a number. And then here the file is tied to one of our types from our other option set. And then we have the actual file itself, right? The thing that's being uploaded through a file uploading tool. We'll go over the one that we're using here in our app. So I've just called this field upload to keep it easy to understand, right? This is the name of my data type with the emoji. This is the field name, and then this is the format of the field. All right, now I'm going to point out one more thing here related to your data types, and those are privacy rules. This is going to tie into how you want to create these restriction access levels. And again, this is what I have in place. It's not necessarily how you need to do it, but learn the concepts, and that way you can apply whatever's going to make the most sense for your app. So I'm going to start with the folder data type. I have 3 rules here: restricted, owner, and public. Okay, so I've defined a new rule. I just typed in a custom name. This is internal for me. Okay, that's the name here. You can change it if you'd like. Then you have to create an expression that actually describes, that rule. So this folder, we're talking about a folder being evaluated for the privacy rule. Bubble will do that. If this folder's access list contains the current user, and we know that this folder's permission is restricted, then we know that the user has access to that restricted folder. So they can view all the fields, they can find it in searches. We're not going to allow auto binding. This is something that will only give the owner permission to do. Okay, so that's one kind of distinction between those 2 rules. So with the owner, the definition for this is simpler. As long as the folder's owner field is the same as the current user, then we know we're looking at a folder we own. So again, we will be able to see all the fields, fetch them from the database, find it in searches, and the owner can auto bind. And at the moment, the only thing that I'm auto binding is the name field for both folder and file here. So I actually don't have a workflow coming off of this input to update it. It's auto binding, which is like an auto save function. And then my third rule is public. So if the permission is public, then it doesn't really matter whether they are the owner or whether they are within the restricted access list, right? Public implies anybody can access it. So we do want to make sure they can view the fields, find it in searches. Hey, real quick, if you're finding this helpful, take a look at our free extended workshop over at coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop, where we'll take you through our 4-phased approach for going from idea to app. So if you're looking for a complete start to finish guide, this is the workshop for you. We've got a lot of great stuff in there. So the link is on the screen right now and in the description below. All right, so now we're going to jump into the design portion of our walkthrough here. So you can see all the different visual elements that we've used for our demo application. You'll see where you can customize things to really make it your own. And more importantly, we want to make sure that these designs are as intuitive as possible for your users, because often with file management systems, you typically have many levels of folders, right? You have a hierarchy of folders and subfolders, so you want to make it really easy for someone to come in and find the exact file they're looking for. Let's take a look. All right, so we're in the design tab now of our application. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the top of the page and work my way down, going through all of the visual elements that we've added here so you can see how these designs came together. The first thing I want to note is that everything is on one single page in our application. You can certainly break your approach up into multiple pages if you prefer. Now, you'll notice that I have a primary group on this screen called group main. This is sort of my most parent container element, okay? And this group that I've called group main has all of my custom states that I'm using throughout these features. So we will be coming back to this a few times when we go through the workflows portion of this video to look at things related to the navigation and also search. So I just want to note that this is where I've added all of my custom states. Okay, it's on this group main. Now before I open up group main, you'll also see that I have two overlays here that are hidden by default, and these are my floating groups for that move operation. If I want to move a file or a folder to another location in my manager, these will show temporarily for the user to select, and they know what to do. Now let's open up the group main. I'm going to unravel this. Okay, so we have a couple of elements to show the title. We've got our shapes here to create some dividers, some separation in our layout. And then I have my three sub containers. I have the group for the header area, right, where we show the navigation and the search. In fact, if I open this up, we'll see just that. Another group for navigation, another for search. Then I have a group for my folders, and if I open this up, I have the group for the title as well as a table element, which is hidden by default. Let me turn this on here, right? There's the table, and you can see that group files, which is down below, it has a very similar structure. We've got our header there, and then we also have the table. And you'll notice that the uploader lives within the header. That's a little bit different from the folders. The folders has a button. Okay, but if you can see the pattern here just at an organizational level, right? We're definitely taking advantage of groups in order to organize things, and we're labeling things very, very clearly so that we don't ever get lost or cross wires in our logic, right? You don't want to end up with a bunch of issues because you reference something incorrectly due to a bad name, all right? Now, let's come back to the top here for the navigation. The navigation is a row group, okay? So you're going to see that with our containers, they can either be a row or a column. Those are the two most commonly used ones. At the main group level, you see that this is a column because all of my elements there are going to stack vertically. But once I really dig into these inner groups, I can mix and match rows and columns. So this group breadcrumb here is going to be made up of a standalone home button. That's always going to be there. Then we have an icon to show, okay, we're one level down, and this is conditional. You notice that I had to turn this on here. In the layout tab, if something's going to be hidden by default, we're going to have this unchecked. And we'll typically use conditions to indicate, okay, under what scenario do we want to make this visible, right? And in this case, it's going to be related to a custom state, which I'll touch on in just a moment here, okay? Right next to that arrow, I have a repeating group. For the dynamic breadcrumb system. Okay, this is another custom state, and this is dynamic because the breadcrumb is based off of, it's going to display the different folder names that the user is in control of. So if I go to documents, you see here's really the first cell of the repeating group. If I go over to personal, there's the second cell. So however many levels deep, this is just going to keep going. The repeating group is highly dynamic, and it's just going to show the list of the list of folders, and then within it the folder name for as many folders as you navigate through. So this makes it a really, really dynamic system. You can also see here I also have another arrow for if there is another level down. So the next group here we have our search. So I've got a regular input for the user to type in their search term. Then I have a drop down so that we can offer them our various option set choices. Okay, so the type of choice here is our option set type, and then the choice source is all option set type. These are all of the spreadsheet, document, PDFs. These items here are what will populate this drop down dynamically. All right, so now moving into the folder section, I do have a simple button to trigger the creation of a new folder record, which will have it automatically populate in this table here. So let's take a look at the data source for the table. The table's type of content is going to be folder, and we're going to actually have two merged searches because I have to account for the fact that I should be able to look at both public folders as well as restricted folders that include me on the access list. So by merging two separate searches, I can ensure that I'm grabbing just those folders and putting them together in one single table here. The first search is going to search for folders that are restricted, right? Permission equals restricted, as long as the access list contains the current user. And because the list of items here that we display are going to be based off of the current folder that we're looking at. So for example, right now we're on personal. That's another filter that we're going to add to this search. Parent folder equals, and here's a custom state that we have that's going to keep track of our current folder. Again, group main is where all my custom states are. Current folder is the name of the state. The value is going to be whatever the user is currently looking at. So whenever I click on the breadcrumb item, right, if I go to documents, what I'm doing there in the workflows is I'm changing the custom states value. So the current folder is now documents. Or if I go to the work folder, now I've changed it again to work. Okay, so there's a few places throughout this interface where we're updating the current folder that we're looking at. And so our table is going to reference that custom state so that it can help filter the list of essentially subfolders within that selected folder. Okay, so once I have those private folders, then I'm going to merge it with a second search of public folders, again, within the parent folder that we're currently looking at. And then once I have my merged searches together, I'm going to sort them all, right? Sort the list, the combined list by name so that it's in alphabetical order. In the condition, we change things up just a little bit. This is at the table level still. If there is no current folder, right, if this is empty, that tells me that we're at the home state, because home is not actually a folder that the user has created. I've hard-coded this design where it's just, a text that I've typed in, it's static, but I'm going to consider that the root level of the file manager, and technically there is no current folder selected, but we can still create folders to start things off in the hierarchy and add files without a parent folder so that it's at the top of the hierarchy here. Okay, so in our condition, I do need to change the search a little bit if we're at the root level. If the current folder is empty, slight change where we're going to say parent folder is empty here, right? Everything else is the same. We're still merging it with a second search for public, but the parent folder is empty. Okay, so we're being very specific about that. Now we have a visibility property here for the table, and this is going to be true for both our folder and file tables. By default, under the Layout tab, I have this not visible because I don't really want to show an empty table if there aren't any files or folders to show, right? So I'm going to make sure that this is going to collapse when hidden, and only when the table's list of folders, so in other words, the data source, count is greater than 0, okay, so there's at least one folder that's found from the search here or the search here, whichever one's kicking in. As long as there's at least one, then we can display the table. If there are 0, then there's really nothing to see. We're just going to see kind of an empty table with just the headers, and that's not really useful. It kind of looks broken, so we'll leave it to its default state, which is not visible in that case. Okay. And then we have another condition here specifically for our search feature, which we'll come back to. We changed the data source to only show the search results. That's really what this is doing here. And so it departs from our default data sources. All right. Now, within our table, notice our, let me actually start at the table level here. The table direction is vertical, which means that every new folder or file is going to expand the table vertically, right? So everything in a row is related to the exact same record. This is the folder's name, this is the folder's owner, the folder's modified date, right? So we expand vertically. A new folder will do this, right? We have another line down below. Okay, I'm going to delete that empty folder now. Okay, so vertical. So the first row, technically row 0, this is going to be my sticky row here. So if I have a lot of folders and I'm scrolling through things, I will always be able to see row 0. It will stick there for me and it won't scroll away. Okay, so this is where I've added my background color. I have text inside of the cells to create those designs. Now the row 1, where you can see where the infinity symbol is, this is my dynamic repeating row. Okay, so make sure that you remove the fixed number of repeating rows here so that it can create as many as the data source has. And similar to the header row, you're just going to populate each of the cells with whatever details you want to display. So I want the user to be able to edit the name in line. You don't have to do this here. I have an input. If you prefer to have a separate page in your application for editing details, or maybe in a pop-up, that's completely up to you. Okay, so I have an icon here for the restriction access to help the user understand quickly what access right this folder is set to. By default, we'll show the shared folder icon. This is if it is restricted. And then in the condition, I'll say if the permission is public, then we're going to change it to that public kind of globe icon there. Okay, so we can see what that looks like. Okay, so like I said, we have an input here. This one is tied to the name field through auto binding. So as soon as the user types in something new, it will automatically change the name in the database. It's not going to go through a workflow. You do need to make sure that you have privacy rules enabled, at least one that references the name field in order for this to work properly. And this will automatically pre-populate the input with whatever name is currently saved to that record. Next to this, I have a group here to display the avatar, the name, and the email address for the owner. Notice that I'm leveraging this group to change the data source at the group level to a user. Right now, the data source here is the rows folders owner. Why did I do that? Well, all of the details inside are going to be about the user. So it simplifies my expressions within it. So I can just say parent group's user's avatar, parent group's user's full name. I have a text element to display the modified date, pretty straightforward there. And then I have these icons to display the counts of subfolders and files within the folder that we're looking at in the row. Now here is where I've chosen to use an align to parent structure for these groups, right? So I have this one here and this one here. They're not labeled. Let's label them right now. This is folder count. And for group M, we're going to relabel this to file count, just like that. Okay, so both the folder count and file count groups are set to align to parent because inside, okay, we go to folder count here. I have two elements that are stacked on top of each other. I have an icon. Notice that it's in the center of the group folder count container. And this is just going to have my folder icon where it's empty in the middle. And then I have a text to display dynamically the number of child folders for this rows folder. Right, so I'm currently looking at a folder in the row. This is going to tell me the number of children folders that it has. And so I've stacked them on top of each other specifically to get this look. Again, you can, of course, approach these designs however you'd like. All right, so next to this section here in my column E, I have my button. Let's close this down real quick, cell 1E, to open the folder. And what this is doing is just going to update that custom state again so that we can change the data source perspective of the table for a different folder. And then I also conditionally am going to display my more menu. And this is only going to be for the owner of the folder. You can see here the layout is that it's hidden by default. And then in the condition, if the rows folder's owner is the current user, then we're going to make this visible. Now, this particular element is actually a reusable element. Because I specifically wanted to get this kind of design where I have this pop-out menu that kind of overlaps the table. And the only way to do that design, right, the only way to accomplish that is to wrap all of that inside of a reusable element. So I'm actually going to open up that reusable element now. Here I have folder menu. Okay, so the element itself is just the icon. That's going to be something the user clicks on to display this group. Okay, and this is actually a group focus element where by default it's always hidden. That's the nature of group focus. But when you show it in a workflow and you have a reference element that it gets attached to. So you can see that I've created some offset so that it specifically shows here, you know, the upper right corner of the group focus is going to align itself with the lower right corner of the icon. Because this is a reusable element, we need to make sure that we can pass information into it from the repeating group cell. And that way every individual cell, right, you see here, is going to be able to reference the rows record, right? Because we need to pass that data around. So I need to make sure that my reusable element, okay, in my case, I've called this folder menu. This is at the reusable level. I set the type of content to folder for this one. I've got a pretty much identical reusable element for file menu. And the only difference is that we're referencing a file record rather than a folder record. Okay. Again, I did that because I wanted to keep the separation to make things easy. Technically, you could put it all in one. It just requires a little bit more organization, a little bit more crafting to make sure that you can switch between data types. But honestly, separating them kind of reduces error, can reduce mistakes, even if you're having to repeat yourself a little bit. You start with one, just copy and paste it, and you can tweak it for the second one. Okay, so inside of my group focus, I have these 4 different actions to, so we can go through some different functions you can create for your records: managing access, move, change owner, and delete. And for all of these things, actually I should say for 3 of them, the move is going to use that group focus that's at the top of the screen. But for the other three, I'm going to be showing a pop-up. And notice that these pop-ups are inside of the reusable, okay? Because again, the reusable is going to know the data source of the row. It's like we've wrapped it all up and kind of compressed it into this tiny little element here. But once we engage with this element, we show other elements in that reusable, right? I can show these pop-ups. That's a part of the reusable, and it's going to be able to reference the row so that when I'm making changes, I know exactly which record to change. Okay, so these three pop-ups I have, let me close the group focus. Here's for my deletion. Okay, notice that I'm still passing that information in. I still want to reference the reusables folder so that everything inside can display details about the folder. Our workflows will also be able to reference it. Okay, so I've got some messaging here. Then I also have my change owner. Okay, so I'm going to display the current owner's details, right? The folder's owner, their avatar, their full name, their email. And then I have a search box. Search box element's a little different from the regular input. It actually allows you to do that kind of autocomplete function. So if we take a look over here, let's say I want to change the owner of this spreadsheet file. Again, we have very similar functions between folder and file. I'm going to say change owner. Here, if I wanted to change the owner to Chandler, I can just start typing in the first few letters and it'll start to match against whatever's in the database. And when I select, I'm going to reveal this selected user's photo and their email just to give the user another visual cue. So down below that search box, I have another group to display the search box value, which is the selected user. That's the data source of this inner group, and that way I can display the avatar as well as the email address. Okay, and then we have our action buttons here. Okay, so then let's go over to our other pop-up, which is our access list. Close this here. Okay, our access list, similar structure to the change owner, with kind of the vertical styling here. So the first thing we have is a drop down for the user to change the permission. This was the public versus restricted. So this is also pointing to our other option set, our permission option set. We're going to show all choices. We only have 2 in our database here. Notice that I don't want this to be empty, right? Every folder should have one of those selected. I don't want them to not have a permission in the database. Okay. And I have another search box to search for users. And because the access list can be a list of people rather than a single owner, right? I'm going to organize all of the people in a repeating group. So if I open up my group here somewhere, here we go, repeating group user access list. And I want to point out kind of the data source here because you'll notice that we're not actually doing a search. Wherever we can avoid searches, we're helping our application be more optimized, use less workload units. Okay, so I have access to the existing access list for the folder by referencing the folder itself and going to access list, right? That's the list of users. Now, as the person who's updating the access list is entering in more people, we want to sort of temporarily add it to this list here, right? So if I add, let me go back and let's go to the sample document. Let's say I add Monica to this list. I may change my mind and click on discard. Okay, so if I open up sample document again, you'll see that Monica's not there. Monica was never committed. Another way that I can remove Monica is by selecting the icon here. Okay, so I'm kind of giving my user 2 different ways of doing that. Only when I save changes will it actually commit Monica to the list. So how am I keeping track of this sort of temporary list? Well, that's another custom state. There are some custom states that we're using within the reusables that are not going to live on the page, right? Not on that group main container, but rather within the reusable. Here, for example, I have pop-up access list has a list of users, which I've called pending users. So what's happening is every single time I search for a user, it's going to add it to that pending list. And my repeating group is combining the existing list of people with my pending list. And we'll take a look at the workflow again a little bit later in this video to see exactly how you create that expression to save those changes. So now moving over to the file menu, it's really all very, very similar. We have our group focus, we have our pop-ups to delete the file, slight differences in the wording, of course, here. Pop-up to change the owner and to manage the file access. We've structured them very similar, so the designs here are going to be nearly identical. Now, going over to our third section, Our table is going to have some differences to the folder table, right, for our files here. Before I go into that table, though, I do have a multi-file uploader that we're using to capture all of our files. So this is coming from a plugin. If I go to my plugin section, we're using this here. This is a Bubble plugin. It's a free plugin, very simple. It's only one visual element that gets added to your editor, multi-file uploader, and that's exactly what I've added to my design here. Okay, so if you search for multi-file uploader, you'll see right there. And I've designed it so that, it takes up the full width. I've got a background color. We've got this sort of dotted border to like really visually cue the user that you can drag and drop things here. Okay, and enough space for them to see multiple files moving there. Again, the file table set up very similar to the folder. Couple differences. We're showing different details here for the type and size. So for the type, I've actually got different conditions for each of the types of my option set choices. You can definitely accomplish this a few different ways if you want to organize your types in your database, or if you wanted to save your icons or images for each of the types, you can create another attribute here and then upload those icons independently per choice. That's completely up to you. What I've done, this is the only place where I'm showing icons right now, so it didn't take much for me to just create these these conditions real quick where, if the current row's files type is documents, for example, that's my first option in the option set, then I'm going to use this document icon. The Bootstrap icons actually has a lot of different choices for different types of documents, which I like. So I've done that for all the different types that I have here in our option set. Now the size text here is going to display the size in bytes. That's our number field that we have at the file level. And I actually have 3 different versions of this in the expressions. I have a default here that will display it in kilobytes, right? KB, so we're taking bytes divided by 1,000, rounding it to 1 decimal place. Or depending on if the size is less than 1, right? If we take the bytes and divide it by 1,000 and we have less than 1 kilobyte, then we're just going to display things in bytes as is. However, if that calculation is greater than or equal to 1,000 kilobytes, then we're going to convert it to megabytes like this here. And then we have an open button to open up our file, which will trigger a workflow. Again, we'll take a look at that. And again, here we have our reusable element. I do want to call out the reusable element for both the folders and files table. Let me open this up here. Remember, these are instances. These are instances of the reusable design that live inside of the tables row. Okay, so it will duplicate for us, but for every instance, we're going to pass in the current rows folder, or here, the current rows file. Right? So that once we're inside of it, let's go into the folder here, everything can reference that data source. So that's why it's really important at the reusable level that you set the type of content here. All right, so that's what we've got together here for our design. You can take this a million different ways for your application. So use this as a guide and as some inspiration for how you can organize the design in your app. All right, so you've put together your database architecture. You've got some designs going for your front-end interface. Now it's time to connect those two through workflows. Your workflow logic can really bring your application to life by making things functional. So this is where you're going to give Bubble all of the instructions to, actually upload the files or delete them, search through them, preview them for the user within the design. This is really the connecting piece that brings everything to life. Let's take a look. All right, so for workflows, we're going to look at a few things. I'm first going to touch on the navigation system. We're working with a couple of custom states for that. Then we'll take a look at the creation of our records, creating new folders and files, then being able to manage them, right? Manage the access list, change the owner, delete them, edit things, okay? And then we'll take a look at the search functionality. So for the navigation, the primary way that a user is going to move through the folder system is to click on this open button. And as they move deeper into the hierarchy, we're going to have a breadcrumb to follow at the top of the screen. Okay, so let's follow this open button click. This is within my navigation options here, or my navigation workflow events. Click on this button. I'm going to set 2 states. Okay, these 2 states again are on my group main container. I have a state called current folder where the value is a folder record. And then I have a state called breadcrumb where the value is a list of folders. Okay, so let's go back to that group main so you can see this here. Breadcrumb is a list of folders. Current folder is just a single folder. Okay, so if I'm clicking on open, the current folder is going to be whatever the rows folder is. Let's actually go to documents here, right? So this is now the current folder. If I go to sample, now sample is the current folder and so on. And we have this breadcrumb being created for us where we have documents and then sample. So that's the first thing that happens when I click on open. Now, what happens if I click on home? Well, I'm basically backing out of all of those subfolders. And home is not a folder really in the database like all of the users' custom folders are. So you see what happens here? We're just clearing out the values. It's like resetting our navigation. So I'm just going to set them to a blank value, and that way this happens, right? I clicked on home there, the navigation went away, and I'm back at the root level of my file manager. The other way to navigate is by clicking within the breadcrumbs area. So if I go to media, images, and illustrations, right? And then let's say I want to jump over to media. I click on media directly and it removes everything that came after it. All right, so the expression here for the custom state, first of all, we do want to change the current folder to whatever it is I'm selecting in that repeating group, right? That breadcrumb design. But the custom state, we're going to craft, basically update the breadcrumb here. It's going to be the existing breadcrumb. Okay, so I'm referencing the custom state itself, group mains breadcrumb, items until the current cell's index. Items until the current cell's index. So items until just means give me everything in this list up until a certain number. So if I click on images, I want the existing breadcrumb, which is media, images, photos, items until the cell index of images, which is going to be number 2. So media, images, photos, up until the second item in that list, which will just give me media and images. So I'm going to click on that now. We can see that's exactly what happens. Okay, because this is inside of a repeating group, you have access to the cell's index, which is just the position in the list. All right, so the next workflow we're going to look at is creating a new folder. So I'm going to jump into my workflows area. I'm in my workflow folder called folder. And in this area here, I actually have 2 different workflow events for this button to create a new folder in my file manager. Okay, one is if the group mains current folder, that's that custom state we were just looking at, if that's empty versus if it's not empty. What's the difference between empty versus not empty? Well, if it has a value, that means that we are within one of our custom folder views. If it doesn't have a value, right, the current folder, that means we're at the home level, right? Remember, if I click on home, we clear out that custom state. So if it's empty, I'm creating a folder where it's restricted by default. That's just a choice I made. I'm adding the user to the access list automatically, and I'm making them the owner, right? They're creating the folder. But notice that I'm not setting a parent folder here. I'm leaving that blank. That's because I'm at the root level, and I want to assume that whenever the user clicks on new folder, they want to create it for the view that they're currently in. Okay, so going over to the alternate example here, we have to take into account that there's now a parent involved, and so we need to have a two-way relationship. That's why I split these up. So I'm still going to create a new folder. Same values for the 3 fields I had before, permission, access list, and owner, but the parent folder is now incorporated where it's going to equal the group mains current folder, right? Whatever view I'm currently in. And then I'm going to take a second action here to modify that current folder, that parent folder, and add my brand new record as a new child of that parent, right? This is a list field here, so I'm going to say add a single new item, right? The result of step 1 to this folder's list of children. Just like I added a user, a single user to this access list. And when the folder is first created, the access list is only going to have 1 person in it to begin with. Okay, so that's creating a new folder. All right, so now let's look at creating a new file. So we're going to be triggering a workflow off of the change of this input here. The multi-file uploader, which is that plugin, is technically an input. So just like you can create workflows off of any input change, we can do the same thing here with multi-file. Now, for my demonstration here, I'm going to show you the workflow that you would need in order to create a single file that's dropped into that uploader. I also have an alternate for if you want to allow for multiple files. to be added, which is typical for a file managing type of application. I've got this disabled for now because I really only want my single flow to run. The multi approach is going to require backend workflow. My demo application isn't on a paid plan, and so it can't access running the backend workflows, but we can set them up. So I will be able to walk you through it so that you can put it into your own app as well. So when the multi-file uploaders value is changed, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to extract information about the file in question. Okay, now this action is coming from our second plugin that we have in this app, which is called head request / get file info. It's a very simple plugin where we're just going to be running this workflow action. There's really not much to configure, and the plugin will get those details for us, the size of the file as well as the type of the file. Okay, that's the first thing. So I just need to provide the URL of the file that I'm working with. You do have to include https:// just by typing that in before you insert the URL. In this case, my URL is the multi-file uploaders value, and I'm going to go to the first item, and that'll give you the URL there. You can also continue navigating to URL if you want. You'll get the same result. Okay, so the result of this action is it will extract those details. So now I can create a new file record in my database with those details. That's why I've sequenced it this way. So file has much more information that we want to capture here upon creation. The access list is going to add the current user, just like the folder. The name of the file, we actually get that by default. Bubble does expose that from the file value. So again, I'm going to the file multi-file uploaders value first item because the multi-file uploader is technically structured as a list. So my demonstration here is assuming that there's only one item there. So first item's file name. Owner is the current user. By default, we're going to do a restricted permission. The related folder is going to be the group main's current folder. Okay, so this is the folder that the file belongs to. The size in bytes is going to be the result of step one's content length. This is details. These are details that are coming from the plugin. Content length is the size. And then for the type, we kind of have to find the type in our option set and then filter it by the official content type that the plugin is giving us. So I'm starting my expression with all OS types. I'm actually going to build this from scratch here so you can see how this came together. Because the type field is the option set format of my file types, it's going to give me these choices. But I'm actually going to go to over here where it says get an option, and I'm going to select type, and I'll choose all options. So now I have a list of types, which is not compatible with this field, and it's not actually what I want to save here. I want to save the type of this file specifically. So I'm going to filter this list, whoops, right here, trying to select, there we go, filter, and I want to filter based off of this type. This is my option set choice. Content types, okay, this is a custom attribute that I've created on the option set, just as a reminder. Let's go back over here, right? I created this here, and one of my choices could have one or more content types. So for images, I want to be able to detect JPEGs. I want to be able to detect PNGs or SVGs or any other type of image that I would expect my users to upload. So that's why this is a list here. So in my expression, I want to say, let's go back to it. Where was I? I was in the files over here. Okay, filtering this option set choices content types, which is a list, has to contain the result of step one's content type. The result of step one is the exact content type of the file. So I'm only interested in the option set choice where the list contains that extracted type. Once I've filtered it down, it should only give me one option set choice left, right, in this filtered list here. But I still need to say first item in order to convert the expression to one single value, because this type field is a single value field. Okay, I know that was a little bit of a maze to get through that one, but that's how we're going to match a custom list of types with values that are coming from our plugin. Okay, and then we have, again, the actual uploaded file coming from the multi-file. So I'm going to say multi-file uploaders value first item. Once the file is created, I can modify the folder that I'm in, and I'm going to add that new file to the folder's list of files. Okay, just another list field here. I'm going to reset inputs. This will reset the multi-file uploader so that those files don't stay there and confuse the user. So this is essentially the approach, right? The method for creating one single file. So you can see that from that perspective first. Now I'm going to show you from the perspective of running this on a list of files. We're going to have the same operations, but we're going to have that handled in the back end because we cannot anticipate how many files the user wants to upload at once. So we need something that can dynamically cycle through the full list for us and run all of these actions. So in my backend workflows, I've created an API workflow here called create file. The workflow is going to have two parameters so that the page can send those two details to this workflow, a file value, this is an uploaded file, and then a folder value. This is going to be the current folder that we're working within. You should look at this from the perspective of creating one file at a time. What we're going to do is we're going to trigger this workflow, this backend workflow, to run on a list. So if the user is uploading 5 items, it's going to run this 5 times, once for each file. So the file value will be different, but the folder will be the same, right? All the files get added to the same folder based on the view that they're looking at. So because we have these parameters, okay, going over to my other page workflow here, over here, so the one that's disabled, when this is changed, I'm not going to create anything here. Instead, I'm just going to schedule that backend workflow on my list of files. So we can schedule by going to custom events, schedule API workflow on a list here. Okay, so I need to tell Bubble this is a list of files, and the list to run on is my multi-file uploaders value. Remember, that's a list field. So just as is, the value, that's the list I want to run on. I want to run my create file backend workflow. That was the custom name I gave it. Okay, so going over here, you can see there's the custom name, so it knows that. And then let's go back here. This is resetting for me. Okay, so then the scheduled date, I just want this to happen right now, current date and time. I don't want any delay. And then here are my two parameters. The file parameter that gets sent to the backend workflow and the folder. The folder is easy. That's our custom state again, the current folder that we're looking at right now. And the file is going to be this file. It says this in this way because we're running on a list. And so Bubble is basically saying, you know, each item in the list is going to be sent in separately per run. Okay, so this file is what we want to say there. And then again, reset the inputs so that the multi-file uploader clears out for the user visually on the front end. So as soon as this is scheduled, again, what's going to happen is that this backend workflow will run multiple times, one for each file. And we have the exact same actions that I showed you before for the single flow. We're going to get the file info. This needed to have here, HTTPS : and then we're going to insert the file's URL, just like that. And then we're going to create a brand new file, save all of the details, right? This is the file record in our database. And the type is going to be the same structure like we had in our single flow. So I'm actually going to copy that over here. Let's grab this expression like this, go into the back end, and I'm going to paste this here. Just make sure that this is all still good. Content type contains, we're going to say result of step 1's content type, like that. Okay, so we're all good there. Same action, and then we're also going to update the folder. This is where our other parameter comes in, so that result of step 2 gets added to the folder's list of files. Okay, so we reference the first parameter in the first step right here to show the URL, just like that. And then the second parameter is referenced in the third action. It's the exact same workflow, but this allows us to run dynamically on a list. All right, so now we're going to look at the workflow for our reusable element here for the folder menu. Remember, when you click on this icon here, I'm going to go to edit, this is going to show the group focus just to make it appear. Okay, so my group focus has all of the action items for the user to choose from. Let's start with the manage access. So let's go to the access list. Clicking on this group will show this pop-up. We'll go to the workflow so you can see that there. I'm going to hide the group focus, show the pop-up access list like this. Okay, the user will choose the access type. They will search for users. And when they search for a user, it's going to be added automatically to a custom state. Remember, I mentioned that this pop-up has a custom state of pending users. So let's take a look at that workflow here. This is coming off of the search box. So I'm going to go to start edit workflow. It'll take me right to it here. When the search box value is changed, we're going to update the custom state to take the existing list of users, right? Whoever's currently there, plus this search box's value. So every time I add a new person, it's going to tack it on to the existing list. If it's the first person, it's okay. It's going to be a list of 1 in that case. We'll reset the inputs to reset the search box. And that custom state is going to be part of the data source of the repeating group. We're going to show the existing access list saved to the database and combine it with our custom state list here. If the user changes their mind, or if they want to remove somebody from like the official list, we'll click on this icon here. This is going to do 2 things. It's going to update the folder, right, the pop-ups folder or the reusable elements folder, and it's going to remove the parent group's user from this list here. That's if the user is in the database in that list. If they're just a pending user, then this action will take care of it. So we have them both running here in this workflow event. This is essentially the opposite. Instead of a plus item, we're going to do a minus item to subtract them from the custom state. So when the user gets to saving changes, we're going to take that combined list in the repeating group and update the records access list. Okay, so I'm modifying the folder, the access list field, remember it's a list of users, and I'm going to set list. This basically replaces the list with a new list. In this case, it's my repeating groups list of users, which is sourced from that merging of 2 data sources. And then the permission is going to be whatever the user chose, right? That's whether they want to change it from public to restricted, that's up to them. So we want to make sure we save that as well. Okay, so there's our save. We're going to also hide the pop-up at the same time. If the user decides to discard, right, they change their mind, they don't actually want to make any changes, then we're just going to hide the pop-up. We'll also reset it so that all of the inputs within it are cleared out. And we're going to reset our custom state, you can see here, by leaving this empty. This is essentially how you clear a custom state. Okay, so that's managing the access list. Now the change owner is really straightforward actually. So again, you're just selecting one single user here. So when we say change owner, we're going to make a change to the folder and just replace the value of the owner with the search box's value. That's it. And then we'll hide the pop-up. Okay, now we're going to go over to the next function, which is deleting the folder. Okay, now this one is kind of a multi-step because once we delete a folder, we're also going to delete subfolders as well as any files that live within kind of that tree. Okay, so let's take a look at this delete button here. This is where I have my second backend workflow to walk you through. So we're going to kick things off by scheduling a first step of a 2-step process in the backend. So you can see I've numbered it 1 delete folder. I want it to run right now, and you can see that I'm sending over the folder to delete in a parameter. So let's go to the backend workflow and check this out. So imagine we are deleting, let's take a look at documents, right? We want to delete this folder. So there's a lot of subfolders in here. We have these 3 subfolders, and each of those have subfolders. Some of them may even have files. We need to cycle through all of those to delete it all. At least that's how we wanted to design this demo, okay? So imagine that we're deleting that documents folder. We've sent it over to this workflow, just the one. Okay, so it's the value of this parameter here. The first thing that's going to happen is we're going to immediately schedule our second step. And what we're scheduling to happen in the second step is to delete just that one folder's files. Okay, so in this case, if documents had any files here, right, not within the subfolders, but if we had any files here, those would be the files that we're targeting. All right, so here we're going to run on a list. Okay, we looked at the list option before. We're scheduling on a list. The type of list is file. The actual list is the folders files, right? This is our parameter, folders files. API workflow that I've named number 2, delete file. We want this to run right now. And again, the parameter that gets sent in for that workflow is just a single file. So we'll say this file, which references an individual item from this list at a time. Okay, so once this runs over here, it's going to delete the uploaded file from your application's file manager. Right, if I go into my data tab and then the file manager here, I'm seeing all of these different files that have been uploaded to the app. Okay, this is not the user's front end perspective, but this is actually what's being saved to your application. And if you're deleting, if the user is wanting to delete a folder or files, you actually want to get rid of it from your file manager so that you're not taking up space that's not being used. So you can find that action under data and then delete an uploaded file. And so all this is asking for is the URL, just reference the file field and you'll be good to go. Okay. And then we can delete our internal file record, right? That's actually the custom data type that houses not just the file upload, but the name of the file, the size, all of that. Okay, so the uploaded file as well as the custom data type record that you created. So again, this is from the perspective of deleting one thing at a time, one file at a time. So if we back up one, right, the first step was to delete all the files of that one folder. So now that level of files is taken care of. If this folder has subfolders, we're going to trigger this recursive flow to start the process all over again for every subfolder, every child folder, right? So I went through documents, but now I'm going to say, well, hey, there's these 3 subfolders that need to go through the exact same process. Look at the personal folder, then look at the files within the personal folder. So from this perspective, it's as if we're back at the beginning. I want to send to the, step 1 here, my folder that I'm currently processing, list of child folders. Again, so imagine documents, child folder. So that would be personal, sample, work. Okay, it's that list. And we start the process all over again. So that would run 3 times in that scenario. So for the first time, we would be processing personal. So personal is going to send its files. Then the second time, it'll process the work folder. Then the third time, the sample folder. And each one of those may have their own files, and each one of those may have their own subfolders. And it's just going to go in a loop until it reaches the end of the line when folders no longer have children. Okay, at some point it will stop. And, once we've kind of scheduled those things, we don't need that parent folder anymore, so we can go ahead and delete the actual folder itself. Okay, so this recursive system lets you cycle through an unknown hierarchy of however many levels with whatever combination of subfolders and files you have within it. Now, if we go over to the file reusable element, all of these pop-ups work the exact same, slight difference with the deletion because there's less to delete. So if we go to the delete workflow here, we're just deleting the uploaded file, deleting the file record, and then hiding our pop-up. That's it. So it's much simpler there. All right, so now we're going to look at the last function in that reusable, which is to move the folder or file. Again, both of these work very similarly. So we'll go to the folder version here. So from the group focus, the user will click on move, and we're not showing a pop-up here. We're actually going to show those floating groups on the page itself. So we'll hide the group focus, and then we're going to reload the page that we're currently on. This is a go to page action, current page, and I'm going to send parameter to the page so that the page actually knows we're sort of in a move mode. So my parameter is going to be called toMove. I just made up this key here as long as I am consistent with this key on the second half of this flow here. That's all that matters. The value is going to be the unique ID of the folder I want to move. And with the file, it's just going to be the unique ID of the file we want to move. So I've just called this toMove. And so what happens on the index page, in my case here, my floating group will appear if we see that parameter in the URL. Actually, here's kind of the order of things. The floating group's data source is looking at the URL parameter, right? So we're grabbing that unique ID. I'm going to show you how I did this here. I did get data from page URL, and I entered in my parameter key. So I'm going to say toMove, right? It matches what I set in the go to page action. And I do need to define the type. This is the folder version, so I need to set it to that data type. And now Bubble is going to be able to go fetch that record because we know that the unique ID is going to be in the URL, right? Just like this, let me go over to an example. If I say move, you see this here? toMove equals, this is the unique ID of the folder that I had selected. And because this data source, or sorry, this floating group has a data source, the condition to make it visible kicks in. Okay, by default, it's hidden. And then in the condition, if this floating group's folder is not empty, then it becomes visible. So if I were to just clear out the parameter, that means it has no data source, therefore the group goes away. Exact same thing on the other floating group. Okay, so inside, I can display the name of that folder in this case. If I click on the X, all I'm doing is reloading the page again without any parameters, okay? But if the user has navigated to another folder, here, this button will show up. This button that's next to the name of it, by default, it's also hidden. And I have a condition to basically say, as long as I'm looking at a different folder than the one that, the item I'm trying to move is currently in, then I can make it visible because I know that this is different, and so we actually have somewhere to go to. If it's the same, then nothing's going to happen. It's not actually being moved. So it's just kind of visually helping the user. If the parent groups folder, parent folder is not the same as the group's current folder, then we make it visible here. Okay, so when I click on this button, notice that I'm dynamically displaying the current folder's name. This is going to actually run the relationship updates to give the user the kind of simulation that we're moving things, when really what we're doing is just changing data behind the scenes, which will have a ripple effect in where data shows up within those table designs. So I have a 3-step process here if I need to move a folder. Okay, I'm first going to remove the folder from the previous parent. Okay, and you can see that I've labeled them so that I can keep track of what I'm doing here per action. So I'm going to update the previous parent. That's the floating groups folders parent. And I'm going to update the child folders list to remove the parent groups folder. Okay, this is the folder that I'm moving right here. So I'm removing it from its previous parent. Then I'm going to update the parent field within the folder that I'm moving. Okay, so now it's whatever the current folder that I'm looking at. And then I'm going to add the folder that I'm moving to its new parent. Again, it's the folder that I'm looking at. Add it to the new parent's list of children. Remove it from the old list of children, add it to the new list of children, and also have the relationship on the folder itself so we have a new parent here. This is a replacement, right? And then we'll reload the page again so that we clear out the parameters and it gives the user a visual cue that everything is updated. Moving a file is very similar. We remove the file from the old folder it was tied to. Then we update the folder relationship at the file level. And then we add the file to the new folder that it is tied to. So we have all of our relationships in place, and then again, updating the page. All right, so our next workflow we're going to look at is our search functionality. So we actually have 2 different things that can trigger search or filter our input here, where I can type in, some search term and it'll show me both folders and files that match it. And then I can filter further by type. So if I'm only interested in PDFs, we can see that narrowed down. We also have a reset button to take us back to the beginning. So what I'm doing is I'm using a series of workflow actions to move through my different search operations and filters. Now I only have 2 things here, but you may have many more. You may want to filter by size or by owner, right? And you can definitely add those things in here. You'll just add them as more steps in this flow, but you'll see the pattern that we follow here for this. Some of the other workflows are just related to resetting and also with some of the navigation when you're in sort of a search mode, okay? Now I want to call out that I do have on my group main another custom state, actually over here, called, actually 3 states. First one is search enabled. This is just a yes or no. This is going to make it really easy for me to hide things that I want to hide if we're in a search mode so that we don't distract the user, and also help me reset in my workflows and not get wires crossed. Then I have 2 separate list fields, one for a list of files, one for a list of folders for my search results, right? I'm going to be performing these filters on both data types, and I need to store the results into separate places because they are 2 separate data types. Okay, so search result for one, search result for the other. Those 3 are what I'm going to be using here. Okay, so the first step is this custom event here, which I've called 0 reload. Okay, so this is a custom event like this, create a custom event. This will be triggered by the change in the input search, right, where we type in a search term. You see here trigger, we can find that under custom events, trigger custom events, or triggered by a change in the drop down, okay, where we trigger step 0. I'll explain why we have kind of an alternate approach here. But those 2 things will trigger this very first step in our process. So the first thing that happens here is we're going to set some states. The search result for folders is going to find all the possible folders that the user has access to, both restricted ones that they're on the list for and public. We're not paying attention to like the view of the folder that we're in because we want to search the entire library that the user has access to. So finding all the folders the user has access to and then all the files the user has access to. Exact same thing. Restricted ones that they're on the list for and then public ones. And because this is the first step in our search, we know that, yes, we want to enable search. We're kind of put ourselves in a sort of search mode to help us with conditions in other places. Okay. Now we're going to trigger the next step in our flow here, trigger number 1 type, right? Because I started with number 0. So this is going to filter down, right? See how we're updating the custom state? We're going to filter down our results based on what the user does with that drop down, this type drop down here. Now I've got this set up to really only apply to files, right? Because files can have these formats, not folders. So if the user decides to select something here, right, this is not empty, then we're going to immediately clear out all of the folders because we're no longer interested in them. But we're going to further filter the files. Okay, so notice I'm taking the existing search result list. I'm not doing another search from scratch. I'm taking the existing custom state value and filtering it down so that it's only going to apply this type here. Type equals the drop-down's value. So that way we get a smaller list in theory, right? So now we're left with only files. So then I'm going to trigger the next step, which is to apply my search term. Okay, so this is in my next custom event. And again, we're updating the custom state. And this is only going to apply if the search value is not empty, if they typed in a term to begin with. If they leave it empty, then it's going to skip over this action. You know, we don't need Bubble to do anything there. Now notice that I did bring back the custom state for folders and filtered here because it's possible that the user doesn't have a type and it skips over this, and we still have search results in the folders area, so we still need to be able to filter down on search terms for folders if they're there. If they're not there, then this is just an empty value and nothing's going to happen here. Okay, so again, we're further filtering, and here we're just going to do a keyword filter. So I'm going to say the name of the file or the name of the folder has to contain keywords that match the input search's value. The benefit of this is that it's not case sensitive, but you do have to type in whole words. And we're going to also apply a sorting on our final result here because this is the end of the line. So in my tables here, I've added a condition to change the data source entirely if we are in this search mode, right? There's that yes, no value that helps us. So if group main search enabled is yes, we're changing the data source to the custom state for the folders in this case, right, for that table, versus the files search result for that case. When I click on reset, the reset is going to, you can see here, clear out all of those values. It's going to take us back to the beginning of our navigation, right? No breadcrumb, no current folder. We are no longer in search mode, so it's going to kick our tables back to their default data sources. No search result. We're fully resetting everything. And we're also going to reset our group that contains our inputs here so that they clear out and help the user understand that, okay, we're completely reset. Okay, so I'm going to show you one more time. If I do the word sample, okay, the navigation goes away because I have a condition on it to hide if I'm in the search mode. I see, you know, one folder here, this data source has changed, the 3 files here, and those are tied to different parent folders, and that's the scenario in which we show those parent folders to help give the user some orientation. And if I click on reset, it wipes all of that away and we're back kind of to normal circumstances here. Now, just real quick, going back to this reset flow, or sorry, to the drop down. There's 2 scenarios here when the drop down is changed. If the drop down is not empty or the search value is not empty, we're going to start the process all over again, right? So if I go from PDFs over to images, I'm still in a search mode, but I'm triggering that search process to start from the beginning again. So it resets me from the reload, right? We start with our baseline list of folders and files, and it goes through all of those steps. That's if I've changed my dropdown. And the same is going to be true if I just switch out my search terms. It goes back to that reload to start over. However, if I'm changing the dropdown and both of our values are empty, there's nothing to search or filter on. I actually want to go to the reset mode. So here's the example here. If I click on the empty value and my input's also empty, I'm actually resetting everything for the user. So it's a nice little shortcut for that. It also ensures that the dropdown resets completely so that we can see the placeholder in there as well. All right, so there are our search workflows. All right, I hope this was helpful. And if it was, the content you're about to see on the screen next is going to help you take things even further.